Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our Part 2 webinar session with Barriston Law. We hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. Now more than ever, supporting one another is truly key to being resilient in this time. So thank you to all of our community partners who continue to support us, and want to recognize the Barrie Chamber of Commerce for being a strong partner in support for today's webinar. I'd also like to thank MPP Andrea Kanjan and member of MP Doug Shipley's office, Marissa Breeze, for taking the time out of their day to join us as panelists today. MP John Broussard is going to be joining us. He has a busy schedule as well today, so he'll be joining us momentarily. So just before we start, wanted to go over a few housekeeping rules before. So as you can see, all attendees are muted. If you have a question, use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the window, and Josh and Jacqueline of Barriston and Janice of HR Performance and Results will be answering your questions during the discussion period. And once the presentation is over, the attendees will be sent a copy of the slide deck and some additional services offered by the MPs as well. So we're really grateful for our sponsor Barriston to continue delivering this important information and providing all of us with significant insights that can support us through this time of change. So thank you very much, Barriston. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Josh Fowler and Jacqueline Tuckey of Barriston Law to start us off.
Okay, well, thank you, Mackenzie, and thank you, Sandbox, for putting us on. It has been a whirlwind few days, as I'm sure my co-panelists can agree. I know I've been on the phone with member of Provincial Parliament Andrea Kanjan quite frequently, as well as Janice LaRue from HR Performance and Results and John Broussard. It's important at this critical time that we work together, both private and public sectors, to come up with solutions for businesses, for employers, and everyone who's in the community. And I want to thank my co-panelists for joining us. I'll let them introduce themselves, but just by way of introduction for me, my name is Josh Fowler. I'm an associate lawyer at Barriston Law, practicing in the area of civil litigation and employment law. And we have Janice LaRue, and I'll let you introduce yourself, Janice.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Janice LaRue, and I have a business called HR Performance and Results, and we're a full-service HR firm providing support for businesses in all different industry sectors as it relates to any kind of HR-related matters. So yes, it's been a bit of a whirlwind, Josh, and we've been certainly assisting our clients with even executing on layoffs. So it's been a busy, hectic week.
Andrea, did you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. So Andrea Kanjan here, the MPP for BARRIE-INNISFIL. I just wanted to thank everyone for organizing this today and putting it together, and all those calling in. We're really showing what we can do from coast to coast across the country to really rally together to find solutions to really help general humanity right now. One thing I wanted just to adjust in my intro was just ways to contact my office. My office is still open. We're just physically not accepting people into the vicinity of the office, but the phone lines are open, and certainly email and all the other comments. So if you want a direct call to the office, you can contact us at 705-722-0575 or email at andrea.kanjan@pc.ola.org. Thank you.
Andrea, and Marissa, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Marissa. I work for MP Doug Shipley, Member of Parliament for Barrie Springwater Ormonde. MP Shipley wanted to let me know that he apologizes for not being able to be here today, but he wanted to let you all know that he and our office is open full-time. We have 4 full-time caseworkers ready to connect you with any federal funding and assistance, and that includes EI claims, emergency care benefits, small business loans, and any flights, repatriation flights. So all of our contact information, we have provided it to the moderator, and it's also on our website. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Marissa. And finally, last but certainly not least, Jacqueline Tuckey.
Hi everyone, I'm Jacqueline. I'm a student at law with Barriston. I've been staying on top of the news and the ways that it relates to and it impacts employers and employees. I've been working with Josh to package all of that up for all of you so that we can be here to deliver that today.
Thanks, Jacqueline. So initially we had planned to roll out, and just something Andrea mentioned piqued my interest as well. Barriston is still open. Lawyers, for some reason, were included as an essential service, thankfully. So while our reception may be closed, we're working remotely, answering emails and answering our phone calls. So if you do have questions arising from this or any sort of question where you need legal advice, please do not hesitate to give us a call. Our contact information will be provided as well. Initially, our plan was to go through a fairly comprehensive PowerPoint slide with you, just outlining some of the stimulus package and the reforms to the job protection legislation. In light of the announcement from Premier Ford yesterday, that kind of altered the landscape, or actually completely altered the landscape. So we're going to try and power through the slide deck that's going to be made available to everyone with our contact information. So if there is questions that arise from it, please do not hesitate to reach out. But we're going to dedicate most of our time to answering questions from you. So without further ado, what we'll do is we'll pop up the PowerPoint presentation. So there was an act that was just introduced. It's called the Employment Standards Amendment Act. And what this did was an attempt or a resolution passed by the Ontario legislature to provide job-protected leave to employees who've been impacted by COVID-19, who are in isolation and quarantine. The amendment provides job-protected leave for the following reasons: medical investigation, supervision, or the treatment of employees for COVID-19. Employees acting in accordance with an order under the Health Protection and Promotion Act, employees in isolation, quarantine per public health information direction, employees directed not to work by employer due to concerns of spreading COVID-19 in the workplace, employees that are caring for, relatives, spouses, and as you can see in the next slide, that list of individuals who are protected is quite extensive. And I'll open it up to Andrew to comment on a little bit about it in a second. But essentially the goal is, and the intent is, to ensure that people work from home if they can, that they don't go out if they're sick or exhibiting any symptoms, that they don't go out in public if they're caring for someone. It's to essentially encourage someone and to encourage them that they're not going to lose their job if they work from home. That this has to be our primary priority right now, is to contain the virus, contain the spread by being responsible, ensuring that employers are responsible, not forcing an employee who is exhibiting the symptoms or caring for someone is forced to work. So that's the intent behind the legislation. Andrea, I don't know if you have anything that you want to add.
Just that, a big portion of why this was done is also we realized that daycares and schools are closed. And so that was a decision made by the government. So it's really important for us to address that in the legislation. And at the end of the day, we also are mindful of our economy on twofold. So if people can't work and they feel like they're unable to, and they have to take care of a loved one, they know that despite not maybe receiving an income, they still at the end of this do have a job to go back to.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. So as we discussed in our last meeting, that no medical note is required, and it's retroactive to January 25th, 2020, and it does not apply to the federal jurisdiction, which are banks, airports, interprovincial, international rail, federal crown corporations. So what does this mean for employers? Well, it essentially means that you can't force an employee to come to work if they're protected by that legislation. And for employees, it means your employer can't force you to show up. But it doesn't mean that your employer has to pay you for that time. It could be unpaid leave, just similar to the other types of leave that are protected under the Employment Standards Act. It just expands that scope. So what we're seeing, and I'm going to let Janice chime in here in a second, what we're seeing a lot is employers that are offering or mandating that their employees take their 2-week vacation to cover that time, that period of self-isolation or quarantine. They're looking at temporary layoffs to cover that as well. So there's a whole litany of different alternatives or steps being taken by employers to ensure that their employees' employment continues to be protected, but also ensure the continued financial viability of the corporation or the employer. Janice, did you want to chime in there as well?
Sure. Well, if your employees are actually put on quarantine, either by a public health official, or they are directed by the employer to actually quarantine or self-isolate, then they would be they would be eligible to collect the EI sick benefits as long as they have the required threshold for insurable earnings. And so that's 600 insurable earnings that they would need to have in order to be eligible. They have waived a 1-week waiting period, and so you can then issue a record of employment. The code that you would put on the record of employment is code D for illness and injury.
Thanks, Janice. And for those who don't qualify for the insurable earnings, there are different initiatives that were announced by the federal government that we're going to get into right now. As part of the stimulus package, as you are, I'm sure, all well aware by now, there's a $27 billion emergency aid package. And a lot of that, so it's $82 billion total, with different allocations of 27 and 55. So there's going to be a wage subsidy for small business employers. So that's temporary wage subsidy for 3 months, a temporary income support for workers, the emergency care benefit, supplemental unemployment benefit, plan registration, work sharing benefit, the emergency support benefit. So this is really important for those who, part-time employees who don't qualify for unemployment insurance rather, and it's delivered through the CRA GST credit. So what you have to do is go into your CRA portal, register online, and qualify for that emergency support, because kudos to the federal government for recognizing that a lot of people won't qualify for EI, and they're taking active steps to protect their interests and their continued ability to pay groceries and make ends meet. There's also the Business Credit Availability Program, or BCAP. So there's $10 billion of additional funding, largely targets small and medium-sized businesses, and allows large banks to inject about $300 billion of additional lending into the economy. So there's other different steps that the federal government's taking. And what I'll do is I'll open it up to Marissa to kind of touch further on the package that's been announced. I understand it's still dynamic, it's still fluid, and they're trying to figure out the mechanics of rolling it out. So Marissa, if you have any updates on that.
Yeah, so one of the major things that I think we're getting a lot of calls in, we've had almost 100 cases come in so far, either about EI or the emergency program that's going on right now. And every case is different. And so in order to really get the best service in terms of these programs, you're going to need to call into your Member of Parliament's office so that they can help you out in terms of connecting you with the right programs. I've submitted a list of the different programs and the links that you'll need to the moderator, so they'll be able to share that with you later. But yeah, please call your Member of Parliament's office. They will be able to help make sure that either for workers you get the support that you need, and as well for businesses.
Thanks, Marissa. So in terms of the employment insurance, there's a lot of different nuances that we can spend a lot of time on, but this will be all available on the slideshow that's going to be circulated afterwards. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. We really want to get to your questions, and I see that we're already at quarter after. So we just want to talk briefly about the risks associated with layoffs. So we've had a lot of questions, and I'm sure, Janice, you've had the same thing, if we still have her on. But yeah, there we go. Sorry, my computer. We just want to talk about the risks associated with layoffs. I've been getting a lot of requests. Okay, what do I do now? I can't, my business isn't considered to be essential. How do I protect my employees, or what do I do? So it's very, very nuanced in terms of layoffs. If you don't have a provision for layoffs in your employment agreement with the employee can claim constructive dismissal, meaning that they're entitled to say to you, well, you're not allowed to lay me off. You're not allowed to tell me that I can't come to work. Therefore, you have to give me damages for wrongful dismissal. And so there is a huge concern with that. Now, there are different doctrines that can come into play, such as the doctrine of frustration of an employment agreement. There's different steps that you can take. A lot of times, too, employees want to work with their employers. There's especially right now with respect to everything that's going on. But I do suspect that you may see some of these cases come down the pipe. And Janice, if you could touch a little bit more on that as well, what you've seen so far. Oh, your mic's off.
Sorry. Yeah, I think, there's a lot of conversation around the doctrine of frustration as it relates to the businesses that didn't make the list for essential services, and whether or not they claim frustration of the employment agreement because they were directed or ordered to shut their business down. I agree with you, Josh. There's lots of risks as it relates to layoffs, and those risks would vary depending on even the level of position that you're looking for, like the incumbent that you're laying off. Risks would be much higher if you're doing a temporary layoff for example, a VP of sales, opposed to, if you had to lay off a a laborer or assembler or warehouse employees. So there are risks. I know just from what I've been dealing with our clients, a lot of business owners have no choice but to look at temporary layoffs, and they are aware of what the risks are, but they're going ahead with that too as well. So back to you, John.
Thanks. I do understand that we have John, who's I think trying to get on the line. So if the Sandbox can help facilitate that right now, that would be great. All right. So I just want to spend some time with Andrea now on the Ontario government's closure of non-essential businesses. So we had the announcement come out on March 23rd, and we now know what essential and non-essential is. So Andrea, can you kind of just give us some sort of insight? There was a lot on that list. Can you kind of help us break down how that list is developed and give us a bit of an overview?
Right. So in terms of the list, look, as a province, we've had a lot of, we had good examples of other jurisdictions where they made errors in terms of their essential and non-essential lists. So we learned from that. I'll give you one example, laundromats. There was an American jurisdiction where they did not include laundromats, and it hurt a lot of people who need to be able to clean their clothes, which is essential for health and safety. So it's a good example. There's other things where people kind of, are kind of like, qu'est-ce que c'est? Why are we including LCBO and we're including cannabis, for instance? And of course, for certain people, that is very essential. And it also helps us alleviate some of the demands on our healthcare workers. I can't emphasize enough how much we've been really focused on giving the necessary tools that we need to our healthcare workers, but we all have to work on this together, which is why that clear message of this non-essential and essential list was deemed necessary. But like with anything that's changing day to day, we are trying to be, we're trying to respond to needs. So when it comes to the list and you have certain questions, tomorrow in the Minister of Finance's economic update, what you'll see from him is he'll also launch a 1-800 number. So if you have specific questions about your business, whether or not you aren't sure if you're covered under one of the categories, please call that 1-800 number, which will be available tomorrow. I don't have it right now, but I can always pass it on to Barriston and Sandbox to touch base. My office will have it. But how the list was materialized was taking into account health of people and their safety, and of course our supply chain. So an example I give of supply chain is a glue factory will stay open, and people will say, why is glue important to health? Well, you need glue to assemble boxes, assemble other products, keep them together, and therefore that's essential. We're very blessed in Barrie that we have accessibility to different stores and areas, but not all parts of Ontario are like that. So there are certain areas that are deemed essential because a hardware store is going to be your only place to buy equipment and supplies. So that is why hardware stores are included on there, including a farming community. But a big part of it was our supply chain. For the most part, if you're in manufacturing, you are deemed essential, and everyone, and we're trying to make this very clear, if you are on the essential list, it does not allow you not to protect your employees. And I repeat, you have to have the self-distancing policy in place, places to clean, wash hands, protecting equipment if necessary, if they're, but we're emphasizing that if you are operating and you're on the essential list, to execute those measures and protect your employees.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. And I think just to touch a little bit more on what you're getting at there, for those who are wondering, okay, how is the government going to obligate employers to protect their employees? It's the Occupational Health and Safety Act. An employee can refuse to work if they're concerned about the health and safety of their workplace, and that would launch the first step, which is called an investigation, to determine whether or not the employee's concerns were well founded, and then following that, an action plan. So, I mean, those policies for distancing, for sanitation, those are so fundamental right now in light of COVID-19. Because the last thing that you need right now while you're trying to manage and navigate your business in these uncertain times is to have this happen to you and to have an application with the OHSA, have an investigation. I mean, it's so easy for us just to take the proper steps and precautions to protect our employees, to protect ourselves, and protect our customers to really stop the continued amount of cases that we are seeing, it's really important that you take those steps. And I see we have John join us now. Thanks for joining, John.
Hey Josh, how you doing? I just want to pick up on that because my office has obviously been getting quite a few calls about workplace issues, exposure, and all that stuff. And it's been a while. You may know better, Josh. It's been a while since I've been involved in labor relations. But at one point, Workplace Health and Safety Committee, which was a conduit between the workers and management, I think required 15 employees in order to constitute a Workplace Health and Safety Committee. Could be a little bit higher than that number. That's really been the first step for any employment concerns that people might have with respect to workplaces. Really work through the committee and work with management, because I think all of us realize how important it is that we work together, not just as employees, but employers as well. So that's a good point. And I'm sorry I'm late. Obviously, very dynamic situation going on in the House of Commons today. So I've been in constant contact with my colleagues there, but we're still waiting for the House to resume. It may have resumed now, I don't know, but obviously we want to get this legislation passed as soon as possible. It's an $82 billion package, $27 billion of relief, and then $55 billion worth of tax deferrals. There's all kinds of things that are in there. And I will say that, obviously we've got a lot of information on my website, johnbroussard.com. We've been posting a lot on social media at John Broussard CPC. But if anybody needs information, they can use those two, website and social media, but also Canada.ca has a tremendous amount of information for employers with respect to, and employees as well, with respect to labor issues that may occur, as well as employment insurance applications. I will tell you and update you that as of today, we've surpassed the 1 million mark in employment insurance applications across this country. And so we're really hopeful that at some point we can get this legislation passed as soon as possible to help Canadians and to help Canadian business as well.
So John, and perhaps you can chime in on this, and same with you, Janice. So up until recently, there's some concern or some confusion with respect to the 1 week waiting period to receive EI. I mean, as from my understanding, at this point applies to those collecting sickness benefits. John, can you tell us whether or not that's going to be waived or laid off due to mandated closures?
Well, we can only go by what the Prime Minister indicated last week. We haven't, we've obviously seen the legislation, but it hasn't been tabled in the House of Commons. So until I see it, Josh, I think it would be prudent of me to hold back on comment on that. But I'm hopeful, given the circumstances that we're in, that they've taken all those factors into consideration. Another one that we're dealing with that we didn't expect to deal with: what happens if I'm on maternity leave and I get laid off from my job and I have to go on EI? Do I qualify at that point? So we've been trying to work our way through that part of it as well, but we'll have to wait and see what the legislation says. And as soon as it's tabled, I'll be getting a complete list of what the government is proposing in terms of the economic measures, and we will have it posted on our website and our social media sites as soon as we can, Josh.
Okay. Thanks, John. So I want to open it up at this point to questions, and so do that. So Jacqueline's going to moderate the questions for us and direct them. I know that there's probably quite a few already queued up. So Jacqueline, why don't you take us to the questions?
We do have quite a few questions already. The first one, someone's wondering, we've temporarily laid off all of our childcare workers. They get health and dental benefits. So they're wondering, first of all, whether they're able to be laid off for 35 weeks and collect EI because of that extended period that we discussed in the last presentation. But then they've also indicated that some of their employees have declined the benefit package, and they're wondering whether they would only be eligible for the original 13 weeks or whether they'd also be eligible for the 35 weeks of EI, considering their benefits won't be continued. And I believe that's a question for Janice.
Okay, thank you, Jacqueline. So as it relates to eligibility for EI, they do have to meet actually the minimum threshold from an hours perspective in order to be eligible to apply for EI. And so for regular benefits, so not sickness benefits, but regular benefits, for the Barrie area, the threshold is 665 insurable hours. So they do have to meet that, that criteria in order to be eligible. We've been told that at this point, and we've been in contact with Service Canada over the last week, the 1 week waiting period waiver is only as it relates to the EI sick benefits at this point in time. And for regular benefits, that's still in place. Under the Ontario Employment Standards Act, you are able to continue a temporary layoff or extend a temporary layoff beyond the 13 weeks if you do continue benefits up to 35 weeks. And if you do not recall your employee, then you're obligated to pay out any of the statutory notice of termination, and if severance applies to as well. So, so in terms of waiving the benefits, like at this point, I would probably have to have a little bit more information. I think they should go back and take a look at what benefits they waive, because in traditional group insurance benefits, in order for an employer to have a traditional group insurance plan in place, there are mandatory benefits that need to be in place as it relates to life insurance, AD&D, which is accidental death and dismemberment, and whether they have long-term disability in place. So if they only waive the medical and dental, but they still have the other benefits in place, then I would encourage you to take a look at that, because that may allow you to extend it past the 13-week period. So the 13-week period is you have to recall your employees if you don't have or continue benefits, and then you'd be required to recall them. So I'm hoping that answered the question.
Thanks, Janice. Our next question will be for Marissa and John. The question is, what benefits are in place now for entrepreneurs, and what is dependent on legislation being passed? Where is the federal government in this process?
Right. Okay, so can I just step back for a sec? I'll answer that in 1 second, but Janice was on a call with me the other day when we were doing the Barrie Chamber, and with respect to benefits for employees EI, I think it's critically important that we understand that we do have to temper expectations with respect to how quickly the money is going to flow out the door. Even if the legislation is passed today, it will be quite a while. We've had 1 million employment insurance claims that have come forward just in the last couple of weeks alone. And to put that in context, in the same period last year, we had 27,000. And the other aspect of this too, Jacqueline, is that we've got the bureaucracy that is effectively in Ottawa working out of their homes right now. So they don't have access other than their laptops. They don't have access to desktop and all of the data. So, you know, this is not going to happen quickly. And I really, you know, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news for people, but it is going to take time, even when the legislation is passed today, for that money to start flowing. Now, in terms of business, there's several things that have been put forward and proposed by the Prime Minister in his speech last week. And again, it's subject to us seeing what's in the legislation. But if we take on the surface what the Prime Minister indicated, there will be loans, $10 billion of funds available through the Business Development Bank of Canada. The interest rate, there will be, you know, my understanding is that the interest rate on that's about 5.5%. But there is opportunity. The Export Development Bank of Canada as well has funds available to it. There's also, with respect to employment and wage subsidies, one of the things that the government has proposed is a 10% wage subsidy up to a maximum. I think the maximum is $1,350 a month per employee. Which falls far short of what the Canadian Federation of Independent Business was calling for. They were looking at a 75% wage subsidy. We are going to be proposing something in this legislation, an amendment to it, and it's public. We're calling on the government to increase that wage subsidy to at least 50%, to hold off on at-source deductions like EI, CPP, and taxes as well, and refund to all businesses GST that was collected by the government over the last 6 months. Those are some of the things that we're doing, because the intent of what we're trying to do, and we've heard it all since this crisis started, is that business has a role to play in this, Jacqueline, and they want to play. They want to keep their employees employed if they can. And the 10% subsidy, as we've heard, is far too low to incent business to keep employees on the payroll. And that's why we're going to be asking for it to be increased. So again, Canada.ca, my website, johnbroussard.com, access through Shipley's office. And Marissa, I'll give you a chance here in a sec, but there's lots of information out there that's available to businesses, and you can call my office. My staff are fully prepared to give you that information. 705-726-5959. We've been working with employees and employers to help them navigate and let them know what's available to them in terms of government assistance.
Thank you, John. Marissa, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, John covered a lot of it for sure. Just some of the things that there's quite a few things that the government has put forward. The work sharing program, the extension for taxes filings, as John was mentioning, the business credit availability program, and small businesses can actually apply for a $100,000, a maximum of $100,000 loan. So if they're interested in doing that, they can go online. I've provided the link earlier today. And yeah, there's quite a few other things, especially for agricultural workers, the Farm Credit Canada program and the Advanced Payments program. So if you're interested in any of those, please reach out to our office. Our phone number is 705-728-2596. And yeah, we'd be happy to help you with any programs with the federal government.
Thanks, Marissa. Our next question will be for Andrea. What are the consequences of continuing your non-essential business during shutdown? So we've heard of some municipalities declaring a state of emergency and imposing their own fines. Is there anything anticipated, any call for action at the provincial level?
So in terms of penalties, there are going to be more inspectors being sent out now. In terms of enforcement, we'll work with any municipality that wants to double down on enforcement, but we want to send a clear message, but also be flexible where need be. One thing I failed to mention earlier is if you are a business and if it's unclear whether you're essential or not, or you feel like you are part of the supply chain and for some reason you were overlooked, you can apply for an exemption. The reason we have alluded to this ability to apply for an exemption is because things are changing daily. Things that we may not think are essential now might be very essential tomorrow, and vice versa. So we just want to be nimble on that front. So there are going to be, like we said, we are asking everyone who's not essential to shut down tonight, I should say. There has been enforcement in different jurisdictions within Ontario where OPP has gone and given people a fine. So that is being implemented on their side, and it does really matter municipality to municipality. But we're hoping that it's not going to come to such a heavy-handed approach. Our message has been, we really hope that people are going to work together on this, and we really don't want to legislate common sense. We want to be able to tell businesses, here's what you should be doing, and the goodness and the goodwill of your employees and your business, because when we're all done and we're all through this, you want those people to come back and work at the end of the day. So we are trying to emphasize a bit of discretion here. And as this changes day by day, if we need to get more aggressive, everything's on the table. But we're just hoping that businesses will execute the leadership they always do every day.
Thanks, Andrea.
Just to add one thing to Andrea as well. I've noticed on the press release from the Premier that even if you are not considered or you aren't classified as an essential business, you are still allowed to operate from remotely if you have the capabilities of doing so. I think the Ford government has done a very, very good job of promoting work from home. Even if you are an essential business, there's still a huge encouragement from the public health officials as well as the different levels of government to try and work remotely. That's something we're doing at Barriston. It doesn't matter whether or not we were considered to be an essential service or not. I'd say a fair chunk of our workforce is working from home right now and working remotely. I'm filming from the Josh Fowler studios. Jacqueline's filming from her house as well. But if you are considered to be non-essential, you still have the ability to continue working, just you have to do so remotely.
And another example of that is if you have products to sell, normally you sell them from your store. If you're only having one employee go in to do sales, or you're doing sales from home, that's certainly acceptable. I had someone reach out to me with that exact question. Look, nothing precludes you from selling online or selling over the phone, as long as people aren't physically coming in and there's not more people interacting and not executing social distancing. That's perfectly fine if you find a way to adapt your business to be able to do online. Restaurants is a good example. They're mandated to close, but they're offering takeout and delivery, and that's still allowed.
Great, thanks for that insight. Another question for you, Andrea. If the Premier has mandated me to close my business, will I be compensated for lost revenue? So wondering whether there's been any discussion about this, or whether people should be directed to rely more on federal aid for that.
So, I mean, the federal aid package, I'd say, is quite large. I think John can speak more to that. He's the expert. But I would say right now, our individuals at the province, our Minister of Finance is talking to the Federal Minister of Finance. Been in close contact this whole time. We'll continue to work with our federal partners to try to see what we do to make businesses whole again at the end of all this. It won't be 100% whole. And we'll have to figure out what whole actually means at the end of this. But like we said, we are prepared to do whatever it takes for safety. But what everyone can do is, if we get this health situation under control now and we are vigilant, it will help our economy later. So we're really judged by all the actions we take today for our economy tomorrow.
Thank you. This one is for John and Marissa. Has there been any federal discussion about a possibility for the employee wage supplements to be extended beyond the 3-month period or beyond the monetary maximums if this continues to that point?
Well, I addressed that earlier, Jacqueline, that we are going to be proposing amendments to the legislation that increases the subsidy significantly. But in terms of the timeline, that's not something that we've discussed. The most important thing for us right now is to make sure that those subsidies reflect what the business community has asked for, and that is for it to be significantly increased to, in the case of the CFIB, like I said before, 75%. We think that 50% is where we could possibly land on this. Which would, of course, increase the maximum per employee. But one of the things that we've heard from employees all across the country is that they want to do their part. They want to make sure, we've heard this locally too, that they want to do their part to make sure that they keep their employees on the payroll. And the big issue for employers is exactly that. And, you know, are people going to make the same amount of money that they were making prior to this crisis? No, but they're going to be able to meet their obligations. And that's what employers are asking the government for help on.
Great, thank you. We'll turn it over to a couple of questions for Janice now. Firstly, people are wondering whether an employer needs to pay out vacation pay prior to an employee being eligible for EI benefits.
No, you're not obligated to issue a short-term layoff. You're not obligated to pay out vacation pay before you actually issue that short-term layoff. Obviously, if you're going to do a termination, that's different, where you would have to pay out any outstanding vacation pay.
Okay, and then that leads us to the next question. What are the severance and termination implications if your layoff is extended and deemed to be a termination because it goes beyond the allotted time?
Well, recommendation always would be to go back, look at your written employment agreement and see what the details are in your termination clause. But under the ESA, you have obligations to pay out notice of termination, and that's based on years of service. It maxes out at 8 weeks. You're obligated to pay vacation pay on the that notice of termination, as well as continuum benefits during that period of time. And then there's also, if your payroll's over 2.5 million and the employee's been employed with you longer than 5 years, you're obligated to pay out severance pay under that as well. And Josh, if you want to make comments about common law, because there's some obligations potentially for there too as well.
Yeah, so sometimes an employment agreement, or if you don't have an employment agreement, we typically see that with employees who've been with an organization for 20, 30 years, they won't have an employment agreement with their employer. It will be very bare bones. you could be on the hook for, in addition to the ESA notice, you could be on the hook for common law notice. And that's just an enhanced notice period for your employees. It could be anywhere up to 24 months, which, depending on how long they've been employed with your organization, their level of seniority, their education levels, their salary, their, the prospects of them getting a new job afterwards. So you're looking at, potentially a very significant exposure under the common law if your employment agreement doesn't specifically preclude the common law notice. So if you have an agreement that says you're only entitled to the ESA minimums, then you're covered off under the Employment Standards Act. But if you don't have that limiting clause in your employment agreement, I would definitely seek legal advice before proceeding with the termination, or with the layoff if it's not covered in the employment agreement, because you could be exposing your company to a significant damage claim.
Thank you. We've got quite a few questions about the work share program. So Janice, I don't know if you'd like to get into that a little bit. One of the predominant questions is whether layoffs and work share programs are required to be offered or applied uniformly to all employees with the same job description, or whether they can be offered to a few.
Okay, so, well, I think there's two maybe parts to that question. So I'll maybe answer the question as it relates to work share. We've actually had work share programs in place under our federal insurance program for a number of years. They've just expanded it to include the COVID-19 situation that employers are experiencing. You have to have a minimum of 2 people within your business, at least 2 employees that you would include under the work share agreement. And the whole purpose of a work share agreement is to kind of spread the work across your organization and within each classification from a job perspective or in each department. So it's all or nothing. If you've got 5 customer service reps, they don't have a choice to decline to be part of the work share program. So, but it does allow you to spread that work across the 5 customer service reps, where, maybe 3 of them are working a 3-day work week and collecting EI for 2 days. And then the other ones may be working a 2-day work week and collecting EI for 3 days. So there is a pretty extensive process to apply, but I don't want to certainly discourage anyone. I think it's a great program. We called them today and they are still asking for at least 30 days. So if you're interested in the work share program, I'd recommend you get underway right now and filling out the appropriate paperwork. You need to get approval first before you implement that in your workplace. I think that answered it, Jacqueline?
I think so. Thanks, Janice.
Okay.
We have someone who's got employees who don't qualify for EI benefits because of their age being over 65 and not paying an EI premium. And it looks like they're not on the list of essential workers. Wondering whether there are any options for those employees.
Yeah, actually, I saw that question that you sent earlier. There's actually no age limit for deducting EI insurance premiums. So, so I'm not sure specifically if there's something as it relates to a specific exemption for those employees, but there's no age limit. You can continue to deduct EI premiums, and as long as they're eligible in terms of they've got 665 insurable hours, then anyone who is over that age can still collect EI. For those individuals that aren't eligible for EI because maybe they don't have enough insurable earnings, I know the government, and I don't know if Andrea and John have even more information around the emergency support benefit, because that emergency support benefit, the intention would be to release dollars, and I think it was something around 50 billion, to help people who aren't eligible for the federal insurance program.
It's actually 5 billion, Janice, that they've announced, not 50. And again, it's subject. It's a big difference, but it's subject. Our understanding is that it's going to be in the bill, and it's subject, of course, to Parliament passing it, which we expect, and we're fully supportive of passing the bill from an economic standpoint. And it is a longer term support for workers who are otherwise eligible for EI. So you're right about that.
Yeah. Thanks, John, for correcting me on that.
That's
I think
okay.
it was wishful thinking that it was 50 billion.
Yeah, well, it may need to be,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
We've got a
And there's
question.
other forms of relief too. Sorry, there's other forms of relief that we can look to as well. I know there's the package is fairly significant, John, with different sort support relief, support care. So I mean, just because you don't qualify for the EI benefits or the layoff benefits based on age or whatever circumstance, that doesn't preclude you from getting some help from the government, whether it be provincial or federal. I mean, we have promises from all levels of government and all parties that no Canadian will get left behind. That you know, they're going to take active steps to ensure that people are still able to get groceries. Your employees will still be able to eat. They'll still be able to sustain themselves, and that's the goal and the intent behind the legislation. And it's really important for people to keep that in mind. Don't panic, that there is going to be help coming.
We've got a follow-up question on the entrepreneurial support, saying that the BDC loan is dependent on a business being in place for 2 years and being profitable at a certain level. So the question is there any funding for startups which don't qualify under these conditions?
That is, sorry.
I was just going to direct it to you, John, thanks.
Yeah, and you're quite right that the loans, the $10 billion in loans that have been made available to BDC to provide liquidity for businesses are very, very prescriptive. And there are certain criteria that business have to meet. It was a concern of ours when it was first announced by the finance minister last week. And I know that Pierre Poilievre, our critic for finance, has brought this to the attention of not just the finance minister, but his staff as well. So it remains to be seen whether they have actually listened to the concerns of small business, including startups, and have actually addressed this in the legislation with respect to the $10 billion being so prescriptive or restrictive, if you like, to make sure that that it's corrected, because it needs to be.
Thank you. We've got a lot of people asking about small business entrepreneurs who aren't eligible for EI benefits, but whose businesses are struggling because of this. And they're wondering whether there's any support specifically available to them under the federal stimulus package. So again, John and Marissa.
Marissa, you want to take that one?
Sure. So when you don't qualify for EI, you can qualify for the emergency care benefit. So both of those plans, the emergency care benefit and the emergency support benefit, will be available to apply for in April. The difference with these programs is that you're going to be able to apply for them through the CRA website. So yes, the emergency care benefit will provide $900 every 2 weeks for 15 weeks for those people who are affected by the COVID-19 epidemic. Do you have anything else to add, John?
No, and I suspect you're talking about the emergency support benefit, right?
Well, yeah.
Which, yeah, the longer term support for workers who are not otherwise eligible for EI, and that's the one we talked about, Janice, the $5 billion fund. So there's that too. But again, I mean, on individual cases, I would suggest that, listen, I've got 4 people right now in my office who are fielding phone calls from residents and businesses of Barrie-INNISFIL. So if anybody has a specific question that they'd like to ask, specific to their circumstances, then I suggest they call my office or email my office to get answers. We are on top of every phone call and every email that's coming in. My staff has just been inundated with phone calls, and they're doing great work to get back to people to address the concerns.
Thank you. We have had quite a few people ask about businesses that haven't been forced to shut down, but employees who refuse to come in because of fear or because they've got pre-existing health conditions such as diabetes, which have been said to make them a little bit more vulnerable to COVID-19. And the question is how to treat those employees in a situation such as this, and how they can be laid off if it's not a regular layoff, but if it's also not an illness. So Janice, I believe that would be a question for you.
Yeah, like the federal insurance agents have certainly made it very clear at this point that if an employer directs someone to go home from a self-isolation perspective, and we've had a number of situations that arose where employees have not felt comfortable, and if they've got a compromised immune system, the employer then could certainly direct them to stay home. And then if that's the case, they would be eligible for the EI sick benefits. Now that's the 14-day quarantine, so it's a 2-week period of time. So they could issue an ROE with the applicable code, and the employee then can apply for the EI sick benefits as it relates to that. Other than that, if it extends beyond the period, or if it's not an employer directed situation, then we'd have to look at it a little bit closer to see if they'd be eligible for anything else. They'd have to essentially be either laid off or take the time off unpaid, or the employer can let the employee know that they're welcome to take their vacation time, they're welcome to use their personal days or sick days. And so there's different options in terms of that scenario as well.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit to what Janice said, the Employment Standards Act does provide employers with the ability to mandate when an employee takes their vacation, and that's commonly applied across the board with respect to employment agreements as well. So if you don't lay off the employee, or there's concerns about backlash that could come on your organization for taking that next step, there's a litany of alternatives, like Janice just mentioned, but as well as mandating that they take their vacation allotment. If they don't have that available to them at that point, they can also take the leave. They're protected if it's COVID-19 related and protected in the legislation. Their employment is protected in that respect, but you don't have to pay them during that leave. They can apply for the different forms of assistance that's been made available by the federal government.
Thank you. We've got about 8 minutes left, so we'll answer a couple more questions, and then all of the contact information for all of the panelists will be provided to everyone that attended today. So if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. This will be for Josh and Janice. If we need to lay off some employees due to shortage of work, but not all, should a business terminate and pay termination pay to be safe if we don't have a layoff clause in the employment agreement?
Janice, I'll let you go first, Janice, and I'll add.
So Jacqueline, the question was, should they execute and actually do a termination opposed to a short-term layoff?
Yes.
Like I think that
if there's no layoff clause in the employment agreement.
Well, I think we did touch on that a little bit earlier, and as Josh had mentioned too, there are risks if you don't have a written clause in your current employment agreement that your employee signed off as it relates to short-term layoff or even your policy manual. But if your goal is to retain those employees and you want to retain them throughout, then it may be you need to take a hard look at that and ask yourselves why you would want to terminate when you want to obviously retain that employee. So, you may want to look at the temporary layoff. And we didn't talk a lot about the sub plan, but you're also able to top up their wages, which, that could minimize your risk for somebody escalating a complaint or a constructive dismissal action as well. So Josh, do you want to make any more comments on that?
No, I think you touched on it. The only thing I would add is that I'm brought back to a comment made by Andrea earlier that you can't legislate common sense. You can't litigate it either. But right now, you look at the uncertainty of the market and what's going on. I mean, no one wants to lose their job. And if there's the prospect of coming back later on, and you work with your employee wants to work with you, and there's a good relationship, and that it's just unfortunate. These are the circumstances that we're in right now. You can sign an amendment to the employment agreement. You can come up with some sort of an agreement in addition to the employment agreement that allows you to lay them off for a temporary amount of time. I mean, you have your standard employment agreement right now, right, with them. But you can, if your employee is willing to work with you, then why? I just echo what Janice says. Why would you terminate them, right? If they want to work with you and they're going to collect EI benefits anyway, let them do it, and then they can come back to work later on. I mean, you're always going to have, there's always going to be circumstances where the relationship isn't good, where there's going to have to be a termination, and you can cross that bridge when you come to it. But at that point in time, I would once again recommend talking to a lawyer how to navigate this right now. What should your termination package look like? What are you on the hook for in terms of reasonable notice? What are you on the hook for in terms of severance? Is there a viable alternative going forward with that employee?
There's also too, Josh, a lot of anxiety among employers who don't want to take that step of terminating employment or even laying their employees off. And this is why we've really been pushing the government to provide and increase those subsidies to employers. So at least at a minimum, keep them on the payroll without having to go over to the EI system and give those employees what they need in order to not just keep them on the payroll, but to give them the type of income that would allow them to meet their obligations. So I've heard from a lot of employers who are feeling, and employees, of course, who are feeling a tremendous amount of anxiety because of some decisions in the next couple of days that they're going to have to make.
Yeah, and I think right now is the perfect opportunity to take a leadership role in your organization, to work with your employees, to really build a sense of community with your employees, that we're all in this together. And if we want to come out of this together, we need to work together. So I would encourage you to have a dialogue with your employees, come up with a solution that is agreeable for everyone involved.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. We really appreciate it. A big thank you again to Barriston Law for sponsoring this event. Thanks again to Josh, Jacqueline, and to Janice for providing additional insight into this current economic climate. And a very big thank you to John, Andrea, and Marissa for making themselves available on short notice to answer these questions. Be sure to tune in on Friday. We're actually going to have EDC here to discuss the business credit availability program, which a few of you have asked about. And then be sure to follow us on social at Sandbox Center, and continue to reach out via info@sandboxcenter.com. Thanks again.
So Chris, just one further thing too, and this has been echoed by everyone here, that if there are questions that we didn't get to today, and I see that there are quite a few, all our contact information is available. We're all happy to help out. Myself at Barriston, what we're offering is a free 15-minute to 30-minute consultation for COVID-related employment questions. Happy to answer questions or even just chat about what's the best approach for your company. And so we look forward to getting the information out ASAP.